Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Beyond Room 313 Witches Sabbath. Now, don't run away and hide underneath the sofa. It's not going to be anything horrible like that. I came up with the idea during the weekend. I think it was maybe Jason came up with the idea, but we do something for Walpurgis into Beltane. And because most of the people who listen to the channel are pagans, not all, we have people from every kind of background, most that be pagans. We thought we'd do a little bit of a special here, considering the time of year that it is. Now we have Jade, Tina, Greg, Timony, and Jason, and myself. So it's going to be a nice conversation tonight. And we're going to try and get into the spirit of the night and going into tomorrow. Now, if you don't know what Walpurgis night is, or Walpurgisnacht in German, Saint Walpurga was a Christian saint. This is the story, like the usual stories you have, that she's martyred for Christendom in Germany. But an interesting thing happened in the past where German witches in Mount Brocken in the north of Germany started to take her festival because it was so close to Beltane or Beltane. And they co-opted it. It's remarkable, but an actual Christian holiday was actually co-opted and taken back by the pagans. It's nearly always the other way around. And so that became what caused the Witches' Sabbath. And it terrorized the Calvinists and the Puritans of Germany and the Lutherans. But it stuck to this day, and it made places like Mount Brocken a very mystical place and a place very associated with witchcraft, more so than paganism. Now, after midnight, we then go into Beltane. Now, Beltane, they call it a Celtic holiday. It's really a Gaelic holiday because paganism survived in Ireland much longer than it did in, say, England or Europe, because we didn't have the Danelaws that they had in England and the Normans, which exterminated just about everybody and lost all the folk traditions. That's why J.R. Tolkien had to reinvent it again. So we know a lot, and it was carried on right through to the Middle Ages until the old Gaelic laws ended just around the time of the Renaissance. So we have very good historical records of what Beltane is. In Irish, it means the mouth of fire. And some people say, and it's a good theory, there's actually evidence to back it up, that they also was adopted as Baal worship through the Roman Empire, through the Roman legions who were in Celtic lands at the same time. So in the Gaelic tradition, which is Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, and then what's kind of come everywhere now, is that the idea was that fire purified. So they used to move the animals, the livestock, and people through two columns of fire, and it was a purification thing. And the fire could not be lit until the fire at a place called Uisneach in the centre of Ireland, it was lit. And all those fires was like in Lord of the Rings when the fires lit on top of all the different mountains. And they reckon that within 8 minutes, the fires were lit in Scotland. There was that much of it was that well planned, and into Isle of Man across the sea. So it was a purification, and there's a lot of nonsense about it. A lot of the neo-pagans have turned into kind of a sex festival and stuff like that. Our pagan ancestors were actually very traditional in terms of their relationships and stuff like that. A lot of this thing that they were all like, sex mad and everything. There's a combination of two things: anti-Christians and anti-pagan sentiment, and also the hippies in the 1960s who tried to, let's get some spiritual chicks, man. This kind of thing, the free love thing. But it wasn't like that at all. So I actually love this time. These festivals better than Samhain, Halloween. I don't know why. I just do. I feel more of a kinship to it. But because the end of the winter and the summer's coming, and the warm weather's definitely here. The longer days and the lovely feeling. So thanks for everyone who came, and thanks to everybody who's listening in. And guten Walpurgisnacht agus Shona Beltane. Thank you.
All right. And hello to everybody tuning in on Facebook Live right now. We appreciate you all coming over and chiming in the comments section. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night to all of you around the world. I appreciate all of you, every single one of you, for coming in today. So first thing we wanted to kick off our Walpurgis night special with is a discussion about magic. As Thomas mentioned, most of the people in the tribe are pagans or something similar to that. And I would say there's a good amount of us who are practicing magicians. So we wanted to open up the discussion this evening, both here in the video chat on Zoom and also over in the comments chat on Facebook, as to what magic is. What is magic to you? What is it to your culture? And something in that general ilk. So if there's anybody here in the chat, Jade, Tina, Greg, Timothy, Thomas, if you'd like to start off.
I can't remember who it was that gave us the definition, but perhaps one of you guys can help me out with this. The definition of magic being, I'm trying to paraphrase now, it's basically focused intention and will, causing change by focused intention and will, so that your consciousness affects physical reality. This is kind of the root of magic, and that's where I'm coming from with the whole question of magic, is what's known as new thought, with a capital N and a capital T, what's sometimes called manifestation in the tradition of, frankly, garbage books like Secret. But there is something to that. Think and Grow Rich, the original self-help book. So for me, there is magic is just a word for something that we do anyway. Magic, in a way, isn't magic, if you see what I mean. It's just the science and the art of causing change through focused will and intention. And it works because I've done it, and we all do it, whether we like it or not. But maybe later on, we can get into the first time that I did it, thinking that how could this possibly work? And it worked so dramatically that it changed my life. But over to someone else.
I want to hear that. I want to hear that story.
Well, it was about a woman who I wanted and I couldn't possibly have, but I got her.
yeah, that's what's up.
I've done it the other way around about keeping them away from me.
Yes, I've done that too.
And it worked. Oh God, I can see where this is going. Look at you. I tell you what, certain cultures all like what we call native traditional cultures all have magic, right? But one thing you see that's common amongst so many of them, whether it's Nordic magic or the Sami or anybody, is the constant, like they have, I posted an article the day about Yorkshire witch marks, is that the graphic seems to be a huge thing. The actual graphic, the pictorial, the image, and whether it's runes or whatever, anything. That's I often wondered if before people started painting on cave walls, which is like hunting magic, really, they would paint animals themselves, killing successfully, hunting an animal, a bison or something. I often wondered, did they have magic before that, before they could actually picture it?
Do you know, Thomas, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think they had a connection with animals that is different to what we have now. It was more of a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and that's probably where shamanism came, dressing up as animals.
Yeah, precisely.
Like trying to fool them or be the embodiment of. And they could probably they probably had like what Jung called the free association, where in the past people could actually knew what the other person was thinking and doing. And you probably had hormones like oxytocin were much stronger back then. So you could have that. I remember, like, if I was told this story, I was standing in an office and sitting in an office in Dublin one day, and I was watching two Roma gypsy women having a conversation across a busy road without saying a word. And they were looking at each other across the road like this. They were having a conversation, telepathy. It was as clear as anything. I saw it. And they're a kind of an uncorrupted, tribe.
Yeah, and you have to remember the animistic worldview that existed in millennia gone by, because the way that the nature of our consciousness, human consciousness now, is relatively new. It's almost like we're just testing this thing out. It's not going too well, by the way, but our ancestors, thought and related very differently to the world. And if any of you are familiar with Julian Jaynes' book, it's a real game changer. the origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. Yeah, Thomas is nodding. So, yeah, basically we had a very different way of relating to the world. So our discussion in general about magic, affecting our environment would have been on a very different footing in the past. And remember that in terms of human history, modern humans, when I say that, I mean anatomically modern humans. If they walked into this chat, we would recognize them, even though they might be 100,000 years old. They've been around for a very, very long time. But in terms of history, once we get back beyond the last ice age, everything becomes very cloudy. So we can see very, very little of our own history beyond that time.
Yeah.
And I would tend to agree with the idea that prior to the last ice age is when humans had more of a innate, accessible magical ability than humans do now. And whether it's because of some sort of change in physiology or if it's a change in some sort of control structure that's put about into our society through religion or through whatever it is, to keep people away from this natural ability that we have to do magic. It's like in nature, beavers build dams, lions use their teeth and claws, and humans have magic. We have the ability to create, like Thomas was saying with artwork. There's the ability.
From a very young age, we are told that this is all fantasy, children's fantasy.
That's right.
After a while,
imagination is integral to magic.
Mm-hmm. But the ability to have fantasy and be able to create that, how many times were we told, when we're really young that, oh, that's all in your head or something. It's like, well, the ability to have something in your head and then the ability to get that out on canvas, on clay, and software, whatever it happens to be, that ability, on manuscript paper as a composer, that ability of taking something, as Thomas always talks about, the analogy of the carpenter who has an idea for a chair in their mind and then going and building that chair, taking something that once existed only as a concept and going and making it into reality. And then there's the other versions of it too, where people will talk about what's commonly known as the placebo effect, which works incredibly for some people because they have that ability to consider that thing is true. I was just talking to someone recently about, I want to say it was back in the 1950s or 1960s, there was an experiment done somewhere in Russia where they took a group of prisoners, locked them in a dark cell. Somebody walked in with a hot branding iron and showed the prisoners the hot branding iron, and they went behind their backs and switched out the hot branding iron with a cold branding iron and touched the cold branding iron to the prisoners' backs. And, that sensation of hot and cold being nearly the same, that knowingness that branding iron was hot, those guys saw it. And when the cold branding iron was touched to their back, they still received the brand because in their mind, they were ready to receive, that symbol that was on the branding iron put onto their back. And when their nerves gave the feedback that they were being touched with something that was the wrong temperature, they still received the brand nonetheless. So it's like that ability that we have as a human being with a mind and with our body, we have the ability to cause a change in reality by consideration. And yeah, like Tina and JD were saying, as kids, we were all taught that, it's all make believe.
That branding is about as black magic as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never thought of it that way, but it's true. After a while, if you are made to believe that you have no ability to do anything in this world, you believe that, hence you're not going to do or try anything. You're not even going to try to see if it will work because you already believe no for yourself that it won't work.
Conditioning and programming.
Yeah.
Betty Edwards, in the foreword of her wonderful book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, she talks about that, like, they'll ask a child to draw a car or draw a face, and they'll draw how a child perceives a car or a face. And then someone will say, that looks nothing like a car, it looks nothing like a face. And immediately the child is thrown to a kind of shock, and it starts to doubt its own ability to create, where if it was left alone, it would take its art into very incredible places. But because it doesn't look exactly like a car or exactly like a face, the child immediately senses failure towards creation. And I think that's deliberate, because if you look at the history of the world, whether it's monotheism or royalty or leadership, they're absolutely terrified of people having magical abilities. Terrified. This is why they've had witch hunts. This is why they've had crackdowns and prohibitions and, you know, all kinds of the unbelievable prohibitions in, you know, the Anglo-Saxon monks going around England boasting about that they had destroyed all the sorceries and necromancies of the Angles and stuff like this, and written with a sense of relief. And it just goes to show you that these people at the top know that this stuff works, and that's why they're terrified, and that's why they create a whole thing that's evil and satanic and all this stuff. It's because they don't want ordinary people having that kind of power.
The branding demonstrates that mind is fundamental, not matter. And given that, then matter is infinitely malleable. And that's something that, as I say, our ancestors understood. And that we, I hope, I've talked about this with Thomas in the past, that we may be, due to various crises assailing our civilization, maybe moving into an age, an era in human existence where myth and magic become part of our lives once again. Matter is infinitely malleable. Mind is fundamental. Once you understand, that's the basis of magic. You know, that's what the ground of existence is, consciousness. And given that, then all of this stuff, the furniture in this room, the lamps, the table, all of this shit, that's not the ground of being. So that's just a temporary appearance, and that can be manipulated.
Yeah, and magic is a very practical thing as well, and people don't seem to always understand that. That it's a very, like the day I was talking about, like the concept of stocking up food, right? Storing up food. Well, the fact that we even know of this, that we have enough awareness to know that this is important, puts us already in a kind of a mystery school, in a kind of a club, a Freemasonry kind of thing, a Freemasonry of the preppers of the pantry, and
Freemasonic preppers.
and it is like that, and we have a secret knowledge, and it's not a secret knowledge in the sense that we're the only ones that know it, but we're the only ones who actually do a creative process regarding it. So we plant gardens, we collect seeds, we make fertilizer. And Tina was talking about making compost, all these kinds of things to deal with something that's happening in the outside world. And the fact that you do this and give yourself an advantage is a form of magic, because you're using your creative thoughts and you're projecting a sense of yourself into the future, saying, okay, I have to be this in the future. But like magic is just like any other art. It does not work if you don't pick up the pencil or pick up the piece of clay. You have to, like the Hindus and the Vedas always says, turn, you know, a thought into action, and then manifestation comes from that. And that's so people, like Greg was saying, you're doing magic all the time and you don't think about it. That was one of Crowley's lines, that you're doing it unconsciously every single day of your life. You better learn how to do it properly. And that's when you realize this, you definitely feel better in life. You don't feel cocky or assured, but you have a sensation of, like, I often talk about how the average ordinary Joe and Jill who work in an office or work in a whatever, and I was there myself, we've all been there when we were in the Matrix. You have a sense of terror when you go to bed at night. You never talk about it, but you have it. You know that, like, will I have this money tomorrow? Will I have this money next year? Will I be able to pay my rent? You're bombarded with all these doubts that are in your mind. When I honestly believe this, when you actually have a successful magical operation that works just once, you actually lose that. You do, because it's almost like it switches off that imposed neuroses in your brain.
I have a story that I would like to tell in spirit of what Thomas just said. I remember when I worked in culinary, every night I would go to bed with that terror in my mind, like, is my business still going to be there? Because the last business I worked in, that the guy didn't know what he was doing. So it was very real for me to lose my job every day. And I kept talking to people like, look, I am surrounded by farmers here. I actually don't think I would dislike being a farmer myself, but it was just a fleeting thought. And then I moved here. surrounded by even more farmers, and that idea just got more hold of me. Like, I think I would actually really, really like being a farmer. And that door opened itself up. I didn't have to do anything. The people came to me asking me, would you like to cooperate? And I think that was a magical procedure I set into motion years and years and years ago that I'm now seeing come to manifestation, if you will.
Well, I moved to an area that was like the sticks, and every single thing I need to run my business is literally down the road from me now, including a high quality glycine printing service that is one of the few in Ireland, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I'm absolutely convinced that I brought the world to, it's just like what Franz Kafka says, do nothing, have an intention, and the world will roll at your feet wanting to make you happy. And that's exactly what's the same thing with you, Tina. And when you see this happening, you say to yourself, wow, am I lucky at first? And then you realize, no, I'm not. This actually, the universe wants to do this for me.
Yeah.
And this is the beauty. And I said this in my book, Sorcery. 99% of the times it doesn't work because the inhibitors towards manifestation are in your own mind.
As soon as the seeds of doubt kick in.
I grew up in a small market town that was surrounded by farms, and so we were used to getting most of our food from very, very close by. And I also got into growing food, like my grandfather did it anyway. He was just of that generation, and I enthusiastically got into doing that as well, even in my early teens. And many years later, I think it was about 2010, for financial reasons, I found myself thinking, right, I have to do something, right now to put a floor under my finances. So I ended up working on a farm for a year. I worked on a farm for 1 year in my 40s, something I never had done previously. I never imagined I would do. And it occurred to me that this might be a bit of an abstract point, but most people are so disconnected from what happens, and this nexuses with Thomas's comments about food storage. Most people are so disconnected from the land and from what happens on something like a farm that the processes there are almost like a cult. It's almost like magic, because they're so disconnected from it. It's like, how do you grow a potato, And this is something I talked earlier about a re-emerging age of myth and magic. This is something we're going to have to get reconnected with very quickly.
Yeah, a lot of that is appreciation for the craft. That's almost like a kind of validation of the magical aspects of it, is the appreciation of the process. We don't have that anymore. Food is something that arrives on the table. Hot water is something that appears out of the tap, and so on.
To share another story about magic and how it has a very real life way of poetically unfolding itself. Just a year and a half ago, I was a student studying music composition for film, TV, and video games at Berklee School of Music online. And I had the intention of, once I get done with this degree program, I'd like to be working on films and the occult, documentaries and things like this, working. So, at that time, I couldn't stand a lot of the woke Hollywood stuff and everything. I'm like, man, I need to find the right person, the right people to work with to put my music on as something that, I can personally get behind. And then this is probably around like early 2020. And by the end of 2020, I started talking to Thomas about working on a film together. And a year ago today, we premiered Liber Velocity, and became part of Beyond Room 313 and met my best friend Timony here and have a really awesome thing. And now we're all here talking live on Facebook 1 year later after having released that film Liber Velocity. So that's magic.
Yeah, it's like Greg was saying, the proof is in the pudding. The first magical operation I ever did that absolutely proved beyond the doubt it was not coincidence or just luck was when I made myself disappear. And I'd read about this and I was like, I'd laughed at the idea at first that you could actually make yourself disappear. I'll tell people how it's done if they want to know. I went into the bathroom at 3:30 in the morning and I put a flashlight in the complete darkness. I put a flashlight behind my head, but I had like the light on low in the hallway, so I wasn't in complete darkness in the front. And you start by staring at the light. You see the way the light of the sun is behind me? Well, instead of staring at my face, yourself, your own face, you stare at the light behind you, okay? And it's just bizarre. Your eyes vanish first, then your nose and your mouth, and you don't have any features on your face. And then everything gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner until you can actually, what I did was I stuck a tarot card with a push pin on the wall right behind my neck so I couldn't see it. I could not see the tarot card in normal situations until I saw the tarot card completely and I was gone. And that was, for me, was the ultimate proof that reality was optional.
Did you find it shocking?
Terrifying. The few times it was terrifying as it began, because it worked fast. I thought it was going to take ages, but my eyes disappeared very quickly. And oh, Jesus, and they came back. You know, it was like that kind of thing. And then it's okay, calm, you fuck down. And it did it. And then my face that vanished, and I was just like blank skin. And then Jesus Christ, and it came back. Then I did it again until it's just like practice. It's like sport. It's like learning to fish. It's like all those things. It became, but then it didn't become a head fuck, literally, after a while, because it was almost like the daemon or whatever kicked in and said, this is where you're supposed to be. So that's part of the initiation as well, the doubt, the fire, the shock, I didn't expect it. It worked instantaneously and very, very well. And I think that's what really freaked me out for those 2 times at the beginning.
It reminds me a bit of the first time I stared into a black mirror, which was not too long ago. That also works very fast. And I had that same shock, although not as terrifying as you, but this sinking feeling in my stomach of, whoa. And instantly you see your face appearing back. But you can try it again and again. I think I tried it for half an hour or so until I got a bit tired of it, because I always came up with the same vision. But that is something I would like to try again.
Yeah, and then you will start to see different things staring back at you. This was the whole way that the ancient, well, you're in the right country, the Romans, the Diamanibus cult, they contacted ancestors in a darkened room or even a cave with a pool of water, a bowl of water in darkness. And eventually they would see their mothers or their friends who passed on and talk to them.
It's only because we believe that, most people believe that Newtonian principles rule reality and that matter is fundamental, that we think that these things are not possible. But cutting edge science, for those who are scientifically minded, because most of the objections to magic tend to be, magic in air quotes, tend to be from those who call themselves scientific. Cutting edge science is telling us that, is indicating, shall I say, that matter is not fundamental. So the key to all of this is actually, if you're scientifically minded, is within science. It's just, this hasn't yet, it's gradually happening, but this hasn't yet been integrated into particularly Western thought. So it's taking longer than it should have, because quantum physics is like 100 plus years old. It's just taken a very long time. But magic, materialism, the differences between those two cosmologies are, it is emerging. It's just, as I say, it's frustrating for those of us who see things this way, but it's just taking much longer than it should. But it is happening, it will happen. And as I alluded to earlier on, I think because of crises facing our species, actually, this is going to speed this process along.
I have kind of a story. It's very similar. Years ago, God, almost 20 years ago, I took off on a road trip and ended up living out of a van for quite a long time. And during the summer parts of that, I ended up living out in a couple of different national parks. And one of them, I can't remember the name of the national park, but it was in Arkansas, down by Mount Ida. And down there's massive amounts of crystal deposits. I mean, you can walk down any trail and just find beautiful double terminated quartz crystals. I have a bunch of them somewhere. But while I was out there, I was studying some books. And so one night I had a dream, and in this dream, this like, they didn't have a face, but it was, they were there to teach me how to do this thing where you break down matter and then you can reform it. And it was also about being able to like transport yourself. The dream was, I have it written down in a journal. I should find it somewhere. It's really, really, really detailed. And so I did this thing in a dream, and I woke up and I had the most splitting headache I've ever had in my life. And so I would practice this technique. And one thing that I've noticed that has always stuck around since then is I move very, very quietly, and I don't do it on purpose, but all the time I accidentally sneak up on people, and I'm not trying to. It happens at work. It happens in grocery stores. It happens at home all the time. My grandma used to get so pissed off at me because I'd walk down the hallway and join her in the kitchen, and I'm doing stuff, you know, a pot or a pan or whatever, and she couldn't hear me, or she didn't see me in there. And then she would turn around and, oh my God, you scared me to death. And it happens all the time. And it never, ever happened before. And I'm not trying in any way to, you know, move stealthily or not make any noise. But I do remember that after I'd started practicing those techniques that I learned in a dream, I just moved through reality differently.
Wow.
I think a lot of things happen in dreams that you can bring through into this reality. Like my creation of tarot cards came from a dream. You know, I kept asking my parents, are you sure there wasn't a set of tarot cards that was left for me by grandma? No. And then when I finished creating them, I looked at the back of them and thought, oh, that looks like the cards I seen in my dream. Oh.
Our dreams indicate what is possible in reality. I think that.
Another thing too in magic, and as we're on the Witches' Sabbath, I've spent the last few days looking around these witchy poo groups on Facebook, and Tina immediately smiles. And they're quite horrible and stupid places. But there's a constant thing. A, they're goddesses, and B, they're cursing. They're into cursing and binding, and they're all terrible health and stuff like that.
They don't have the creative. They don't have the creativity to come up with something else.
No, and they like, we live in an age of victim complexes and things like that. But I have a theory, and I wrote about it in my book Sorcery, that possibly the famine in Ireland and a lot of cultures that had things like in Sicily, you had cultures that were hexing the shit out of each other among the peasants. And they may have actually destroyed the landscape and the society by everybody hexing everyone else. And it's a big thing. You look at Haiti, where that's apparently an enormous problem. In a lot of third world countries and poor places where people hex in Africa, and these cultures suffer terrible calamities, wars, famines, and everything else. And I really do believe that when so many people are hexing their neighbors and the neighbors are hexing them and everyone's hexing everyone else, it actually destroys the society. And the only way to escape that is break these intergenerational curses caused by rebound and so on, is to actually emigrate. And I think the huge migrations to America of German Americans and Irish Americans and Sicilians and Southern Italians, I think a lot of that was rooted into trying to escape family curses. I really do. I believe that was, if you read about like folk histories of Ireland in the 1820s and 30s, everybody is doing magic. Everyone's hexing everyone else. And lo and behold, what happens? A famine. And so I really do believe that people need to be very wise. You see these, and I was looking at these groups and I was saying, you're going to die, she's going to die, he's definitely dead, just by what they were saying and what they were doing. You remember the Trump binding spell. You know, and you look at so many people who took part in that. I know Jason Heppenstall was telling me he knows people that personally died right after it. And you never do it to someone that actually hadn't harmed you. And then as you see that Trump curse thing as well, so many people, from Alec Baldwin, so many people that mocked him or satirized him or profaned him have had terrible things happen to them. And some people have a natural magical charge that protects them. You don't have to like them. You don't have to think they're great people or anything, but they do. And you have to be very careful. It's like that. We talked about that scene in the TV show Rome, where Julius Caesar says, where Mark Antony says, so you're just going to let them walk away with this after the two soldiers? And they said, if they've got this far, they have the protection of powerful gods, and no way am I going to suffer the wrath of the gods by doing anything to those two men. And I really do believe all that stuff too, that some people have a potency about them that you don't even dare go there. And whether it's from nature, whether it's from in themselves, but I really do believe that they have actual protection. I don't know. But these witchy poo groups have been reading them. And I think you called them magical Karens, which is one of the funniest videos I've ever seen when you made that video. And that's what they are. And you can see that they're all desperately unhappy and miserable and unfulfilled in life.
Can't expect necessarily to love everybody that we encounter in life, but I think that some of what you've just said should make us reflect on the desire we might ever have to wish ill will on anyone. That's a dangerous game. Let it go would be my advice. Let it go. When you conspire to energetically injure someone else, as I say, wish ill will on them, you're getting into a realm there that I think we're naturally being steered away from. It's not something. I don't consider that I've got any enemies. If I have an encounter with another human being that is negative, then I just I let it go. I let them go, and I move on. I think this idea of hexing other people and whatnot, as I say, is a dangerous game.
Yeah, it destroys your charisma. It absolutely.
Life's too short for that kind of thing as well. You've got other things to be doing. Takes far too much effort.
Yeah, and not only that, if you are dealing with somebody that is a little bit adept in the occult arts, there are ways to harness these things, and in case it doesn't backfire for that person, there are ways to harness that energy for yourself. Then I know that there are people that have wished severe ill will on me. And yeah, is it working, you think?
Well, don't get me wrong, having been on the receiving end of it and had to deal with it, it is definitely a thing, but it can be dealt with.
Yeah.
And it's like that thing Thomas talks about too with the people that go around doing smear campaigns and exposing people. It's like the people who end up getting obsessed with that, like Tina, you were talking about earlier, they don't have the ability to create. So it's almost like the only thing they can create is a destruction about something, and that destruction has to go somewhere, and it's not effective against their target. So that destructive thing does like a feedback loop right onto themselves.
Oh, they fall apart. Yeah. They age terribly and everything. It's really, we've all seen it. It's bizarre. Yeah.
So they call it going nuclear.
Yeah.
So it's like with those folks who are experiencing something, it's like it's better to just go paint it into a painting, write a song about it, let that psychic turmoil, pain, and charge ground itself out the way, like if you've got static electricity charged up and you go and touch something, it zaps out. It's like you can take the paintbrush onto the canvas and discharge that discharge that way, or writing a song or making a film or whatever it happens to be. The act of doing that. The lyrics of the song don't have to be about that incident. The painting doesn't have to be about it, but the act of putting paint on canvas, notes on a page or whatever, takes that psychic storm that's in there and allows it to storm out. So someone doesn't, it's like the check valve. I always use that analogy a lot. When there's pressure building in something, that check valve can be there so the pressure can escape it rather than causing the device itself to explode.
The best revenge is to heal thyself.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, it seems that whether it's something as simple as remote healing, but wishing well to others, whether that's an individual or just the world in general, seems to be very powerful, and it seems to energize the individual who's doing it, and that's something magical that we almost seem to be. That's again, I think that's something that we do anyway. But if you can do it in a focused way, it can be very, very powerful. Just wishing well for someone, and whatever that happens to be, specific or general.
I've found drumming helps a lot with that. You can amp it up. If you use drumming or rattling or something, it turns the power up for that kind of thing.
We have a question here in the chat on Facebook from Samantha. And I'm going to put this out there to everyone in the group. If you suspect you have been hexed, cursed, etc., what is the best way to neutralize that?
Well, there are several ways.
Yeah. You go ahead, Tina. I'll follow you.
Well, when I knew I was under psychic attack from somebody, which would constitute a curse or a hex, well, I put salt everywhere. In every window, every room, every doorstep, little dishes of vinegar also work. For some reason, it really worked. And mirrors in the windows facing outwards. What else? This is something that I picked up from Fiona Edgar, that has worked very well for me. So before I go to sleep, I imagine the Elvis rune on every wall of my house, and then connect them with white lines. And it's a sort of rune that strengthens your own life force. So it's not really defensive or offensive in that sense. It just strengthens your own life force that you just automatically reflect it, that you embolden and strengthen your own aura so nothing can penetrate.
That salt is the most powerful one of all. Organic sea salt is the best because it has the best electrical charge, because ultimately you're dealing with electricity when you're under a psychic attack affecting your nervous system. Just put the salt everywhere, sleep with a pouch of it under your pillow, take salt baths. Now, it has to be sea salt. It can't be, the salt from the supermarket from Morton's or Saxa or any of those ones. It has to be proper sea salt. Now, white quartz crystals are very, very good. Don't buy the ones from the New Age shop that have been polished, because they're full of shock. Go down to the beach, and you can often find them in the mountains. White quartz is everywhere. Another one that is very good is you take the grain that's indigenous to your area. So in Ireland and Scotland, it's barley or oats. It might be wheat in Italy. It might be wherever country you live in, rice in whatever the harvest crop is. In a dried form, you scatter it around the room on the floors. Then you sweep it up into a bag after a while, and then you deposit the bag into a fast-flowing river. That absolutely works. The Chinese use rice, use the grain. That's the most commonly used grain it's almost like baking a bread that's capturing the thing and putting it into the sea, putting it into the river that flows. It must be a river that flows to a sea, not be a river that flows to a lake. And that definitely works. Because I used to have a friend in New York, Eddie Luke, and he was Chinese, and his mother was from Hong Kong. And she used to do this with the apartment building. When she never rented a new apartment out, she would throw dried rice all around it to clean out any bad negative energies that was coming into that place from previous tenants. She would sweep it off into a bag and then pour it into the Hudson River. So, and that's where I learned that, and it's a very powerful one, and it definitely works.
I use rosemary, sanding sticks, or sage, and definitely salt. I make salt sprays as well with different essential oils, like rosemary essential oil with sea salt and purified water, and spray.
actually about the smudging, that is something that annoys me a bit, that everybody always says that you need to use sage for smudging, but that is not true. You can basically use any herb, and the best ones to use is the ones that grow locally in your land.
Lavender and rosemary are my go-to.
You see, Samantha, the thing is that why it's affecting you is your nervous system. It's affecting your nervous system, and that's an electrical issue. It's how your body works. And if you can buffer or put an inhibitor into that effect on your electrical system, that's how you deal with it.
I was going to add one.
It works, yeah. Swimming in the ocean, especially if it's cold, can be a great help too.
I was going to add one last thing to that too. What in regards to thinking that you may have been hexed or thinking you may have been attacked can be one of the most dangerous things to do, to consider that, oh, somebody's hexed me, oh, somebody's attacked me. That thing can cave in on your psyche, where sometimes the best thing to do is just to get on, go to work, do what you need to do, and take care of the things that you need to get done around the house, and do something you enjoy doing. And don't let that consideration that someone has hexed you get past that psychic firewall, because it's like a Trojan horse kind of thing. You let it in, and once that thought is within your psyche, then you can start hexing yourself.
You're right, Jason. You can, you mentioned the placebo effect. You can think yourself well. You can think yourself sick, and
that one. Yep.
Idea in your mind, that as you said, that you've been hexed. I mean, who knows where that could come from? Nowhere. In some people's cases, it might not even involve an individual that they're aware of, but they could just get this feeling that they're cursed, and we see this, this happens all the time, and people grind themselves down, because this idea that somehow they're not, meant to do well. And even if it does involve a specific individual, let's say something happened in their life with someone and they feel that someone's out to get them, well, then what, as you say, what should your response be to that? It should be to get out. Don't hand the power to them,
In serious, sorry, Thomas.
In Irish folk magic, when they believe that a house has been hexed, there's a few things that are quite interesting. One is you never leave or enter the house through a west-facing door. If your house front of your door, hall door faces the west, go out through the side or the back door facing any other direction. That's one. Another one is to on the fireplace to put say a prayer or a message in the fireplace, because they believe the bad energy comes down the chimney. So you must clean out your fireplace and be very careful with that. And the soot and the ash must be cleansed in a kind of a ritualistic way. Traditionally in Ireland, it's died out now, but people don't have fires anymore. But the old ladies used to do things like say a prayer to Saint Bridget, which is the goddess Brid. Another one was, it's an interesting one, is to cover up all the mirrors in the house and also stop all the clocks that are, old-fashioned clocks that tell the time until the vexing passes. So that's another one to interrupt it.
I was going to say, in like serious cases, you can always ask a trusted group of friends to surround you with protection at certain times if you feel when you're under attack.
It's happened to me and saved my life, actually.
Yeah, me too.
And another thing too is you can pretend you live somewhere else. I'm seriously. So you can say you can move and not tell anybody. That's a great one. That was a very common one.
That kind of goes along with what I was going to say. Learn a new skill, because say somebody is trying to target you with something. If you learn a new skill, you change the matrix of what they think that you are. So if you're learning a new skill, my favorite one lately for me has been jujitsu. Not that anybody was targeting me, but it definitely changed who I was before I started doing it. So in a hypothetical situation, if somebody was trying to send something to me, I'm not that motherfucker anymore. So that's just going to go right on by me to whatever they're thinking of.
Or wear different genders' clothes. I know that sounds funny, but that you can do that too. Like that's why in the Celtic world, little boys were dressed as little girls, so they would be safe from that stuff. so they wouldn't know that it was the little boy. They put them in petticoats and stuff. You can see photographs of the Aran Islands from like the 1930s, and all the little boys are dressed like little girls. It's to protect them from both the fairies and from hexes. And you can do that as well. That's a brilliant one, that Timony. Change your identity, change your persona. And this is where the jester thing comes in and all that thing. The what's the word I'm trying to use for it? The harlequin, the different version of you that is not the target anymore. You become it's camouflage. Really, it's got camouflage. Razzle dazzle. That's what it is. Yeah.
The bamboozle.
Yeah.
When you mentioned jiu-jitsu, that's interesting because I did judo for a very short time, just a few months when I was in my early teens. And throughout my life, it's come back again. I've never done anything about it. It's come back again and again that I should do a martial art. And there's something transcendent and possibly magical about martial arts. It isn't just throwing your body around the place. If you're talking like, say, karate, it depends whether it's passive or, whether it's defense or attack. It isn't just about that. And there's something spiritual, certainly about martial arts, and possibly something magical. And I keep getting this thing. And I've asked a few people recently, am I too old at 53 to start?
Definitely not. Not if I can start karate.
Right. Yeah, Greg, it's interesting that you say that because I did Taekwondo and Hapkido for a while when I was a kid, and I stopped when I got into about high school time frame, and I recently got interested in it again, and remembering that there was a significant amount of correspondence between it and the trigrams and hexagrams of the I Ching. So I kind of went on an internet dive looking for information about, is there any kind of Eastern occult correspondences between that. And lo and behold, I found this fellow over on Instagram and Facebook called Paul Rana. He's a Freemason and he's into the I Ching and all that, but he goes over and analyzes the I Ching correspondences with all the different Taekwondo forms, and how there's, I can't quote it all off the top of my head, but like there's an element of earth, an element of air, fire, water, things like that correspond to these different movements, and how those all lock together. So I'm like, okay, so there was some kind of spiritual correspondence there. And I know that Taekwondo being, it's Korean, and they were an older version of Buddhism before the current version of Buddhism came around. That's kind of like the Christianity of the East, but a very old ancient form of Buddhism that had more to do with the I Ching. So I just found that fascinating. And I would imagine over probably in Aikido, and you were talking about judo and jiu-jitsu, those kind of all being related. I would imagine there might be some correspondence back there to some ancient Eastern mysticism and magic.
That existed in the West too. The wrestling in ancient Greece, that was very spiritualistic. The Greco-Roman wrestling.
Oh.
Go do your martial arts, Greg. Go fucking do it. Here's your sign. Do it.
We're talking about magic, and I think that there's something in perhaps in martial arts in terms of physical movement that moves you past a purely materialistic consciousness, if you see what I mean. So there's something, I used the word transcendent in my previous comments. I think there's something potentially along those lines involved. And I guess you could see an overlap with our conversation about magic in just terms of manipulating your environment, manipulating reality. And I think that there's a reason why that the movements and the exertion in martial arts affect people's state of mind, if you see what I mean. As I say, it's not just throwing your body around. It just isn't, And there's also in ritual magic, there's a physical element to that as well. Certain movements are combined with thought processes, with sound, with light, with all these other sensory dimensions. So I'm just sensing a correspondence there that I hadn't really thought about before.
Things like Tai Chi and Qigong put you into a different way of consciousness, definitely.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that I think, not Phil Hine, but who wrote Liber Null, Pete Carroll talks about the occult martial arts, and I think he's referring to Qigong, Aikido, Hapkido, the ones that have ki in either as a prefix or a suffix to it, but that ki being, life force energy that we talk a lot about in ritual and ceremonial magic, the idea of life force energy and the ability to harness that. Like Cliff High, I'm sure a few of you listen to his stuff, and he talks a lot about his Aikido practices and the idea of big key energy and being able to develop that with your group of friends on the mat there. And, you can feel the same kind of thing, Thomas, you've talked about like mosh pits before, and people go to raves, people go to mosh pits, people go to the Aikido mat, the jujitsu mat. And there's that life force energy that you can build up. You can do it in your own house by listening to music with headphones on, but there is that life force energy, that ki, prana, whatever you want to call it, that can be harnessed through Qigong, like you were talking about, Jade. Or, Greg, I'm going to send you this guy's YouTube channel, Greg. His name is Paul Rana, and his dojang is called Prana Martial Arts. So, but he goes into some stuff I think you might find interesting, Greg. But just, that idea that the occult martial arts, there's Pete Carroll talks about the ability of sending I think he called it like a key ball of force out that he projected and was able to, I think, I think he made someone stumble or knock them over. I think Crowley talked about something like that too, when he was walking down the street and mimicking somebody's walking movement and made the other guy trip. Like you can take that life force energy and project it out there. And, now we're kind of talking about psychic attacks and stuff, and going back to what the question was earlier, but the ability to move that kind of energy around. And I think that's what's going on there. In Qigong, they're moving that energy through their body, and in Aikido, they're building it up with their roles and their different meditations. And Hapkido, there's the different breathing exercises that move that energy through different nodes in your body. So, again, it's kind of an Eastern perspective on things, but I think it ties in nicely with some of Crowley's work too, work and research from back in the day.
That book that Bruce Lee wrote that made him famous, the big one that has all the photos in it, the Kung Fu book, before he became a movie star. That book is full of all that stuff. It's not just about martial arts, with mostly it is, but it's full of all like Chinese philosophy and all this kind of thing regarding the Qi and stuff like that. In fact, he was probably the one who made that stuff well known in the West. I forget the name of the book, but it's the first one he wrote, the big one, and I read it when I was a kid, and that's where I first saw the word Qi, and I first read about these energy forces when I was a kid from that they used in Eastern mysticism.
Yeah,
gremlins are in my lights tonight.
And that Qi word is the same. I would venture to say it's the same force we're using when we're talking about charging a sigil, or when we're talking about using charge in a ritual. It's that Qi energy, that prana, pneuma, whatever you want to call it. You can be projecting that. Thomas, you were talking about making the image of yourself disappear earlier. It's like perhaps
psychic charge.
Psychic charge. Yes, it can't necessarily be measured easily with like a voltmeter or something, but it's a chart. You can perceive it there. You can feel it when you're in the zone. You can perceive it physiologically, psychologically. Yeah.
And it can be done in so many things. I used to work with fellas, and they couldn't eat in restaurants. And I'd ask why, and they says, "There's no food that tastes like my mother's food. I can't. It doesn't work. I don't feel like I'm eating." And that was the mother's psychic charge and love for her kids going into making their dinner. And it didn't matter what it was. I'm not talking about like fabulous ethnic cooking or anything like that. I'm talking about, like people just mashed potato and sausages and stuff like that. But the guys literally could not eat in restaurants or outside because they couldn't, everything tasted crap that wasn't their mother's food. Now, that's the same thing. It's a psychic charge going into the cooking.
Oh, yeah, you could absolutely. That's so important, Thomas. It really is. They talk about, food made with love, don't they?
Yeah.
this goes into anything I think that we manifest or create. It's the intention and the energy that goes into it has a huge effect. And so, something that most people consider to be quite mundane, food, just breakfast, lunch, dinner, like whatever. It's just something, energy. It's just something you put into your body to keep going. But that can have that energetic, magical dimension to it as well. And as I say, that goes into anything that we turn our hand to. Whether it's you decorate a room, how do you do that? What energy do you bring to anything that you do in the physical world? And that overlaps with this whole discussion about magic, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you for a fact, having worked in culinary, if you work in a small kitchen where there aren't many cooks able to be placed, and you have a very shitty day and there is nobody to stand in for you and you have to go to work, you hate every person that walks through that front door that day. No matter how much you love your job, no matter how much you love cooking, you hate every single one of them.
When I was a kid, like 17, I worked as a dishwasher in an exclusive restaurant in Dublin. It was a club, very posh club. And I could say it now because he's probably dead, but there was a chef there. And the thing is, they say chefs are all psychos and nut jobs and stuff like this. This guy was called Liam, and he was the head chef. And I got on well with him, and we used to have a laugh, but he used to say things like he was going to rape me in the storeroom and stuff like that. And he said, just one of these nights, I'm going to rape you in the fridge. The big coital walk into this kind of thing. Tina, isn't that what goes on in kitchens, isn't it? That's what goes on.
Oh yeah, I mean the walk-in fridge is called chef therapy, because you go in there to scream and to cry.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to say things like I was carrying a knife around. I would say, if you come anywhere near me, I'll cut your dick off. And this kind of thing. And he got fired because he was an alcoholic, right? And I'll never forget this. This other young guy called John came in. He was just this lovely, really sweet guy. And guess what? The restaurant boomed, because he actually was not a psycho, wasn't a nutcase. And his personality went into he wasn't trying to rape me. The personality went into the food. And that's when I learned at an early age. I swear I used to say that. That's what he used to say to me.
It's another reason to learn martial arts. The chefs are trying to rape you.
Moss, one of these fucking nights, I'm going to fucking rape you in the fridge. It's like, I was like 17, and it was my first ever job. It was my first ever job. And I went to the manager at one point, and I said, "It's Liam, all right?" And the manager goes, "No, he's a fucking nut job." I go, "What's he doing to you?" And I said, he said he's going to rape me. He said he's going to take me in the cold storage room.
Oh.
Make sure you have a jar of Vaseline handy.
Man, all these younger folks nowadays wouldn't know what to do with a statement like that.
Yeah, well, that's what kitchens are like. That's what those big commercial they're full of nut jobs.
Can't confirm.
Anyway, yeah. But that was when I learned that the personality went into the food, and that's why certain restaurants boom, because there's some kind of charge goes into the food from the personality of the head chef.
There's a real similar thing too, going over into the military side of things. I was active duty for 7 years, and in both the Marine Corps and the Army here in the U.S. And I would say that there are folks who've served in the military and done any kind of ceremony, military change of command ceremonies, anything like that. It's like those kind of people would make really good ceremonial magicians if they wanted to go over and join an OTO group or a Golden Dawn group or something, because, in the military, we do what are called like motivation runs, where it's it sounds stupid, but the idea is like you get that group psychic charge. You got the sergeant out on the side calling cadence, and then the rest of the platoon or the battalion, or, you know, everyone is calling cadence, and, you know, there's some real raunchy things we sing about in there, but it gets everybody all pumped up, and there's that psychic charge that you can feel. And then you go into a ceremony and that charge is still there. And then, like, you know, the commander handing over the colors to the new commander or something, it's like you can just feel that energy when there's a good ceremony, when there's a shit ceremony that doesn't have any charge in it. But, you know, there's a tremendous amount of magic that goes on kind of intuitively. And these traditions are probably eons old within the military and still carried on in the U.S. military, at least. I'm sure, you know, over there in y'all's military too, you see the stuff with Great Britain and their things too, that they've got all the pomp and circumstance of things. But
Regalia.
Regalia, exactly. So it's there, and, you know, there are certain elite units, you know, that they have their songs and they have, you know, different things, and it's like that charge is always there in that song, you know, with 1st Marine Division, you know, and then you got Waltzing Matilda and things like that. There's little bits of psychic charge. So that's why I think a lot of former service members or service members themselves would make really good magicians, ceremonial magicians, because it's something that's already familiar to them, you know, going through and doing a ceremony and you know, resonating something rather than just saying it. You know, it's just like a military ceremony.
I saw a documentary years ago, and it was an Anglican priest. It was on Channel 4 in England, and he was talking about the spiritual nature of war and soldiering, and he showed in World War I that the troops in the trenches got really big into like superstition and magic and stuff like that. They put power on holy metals, even if they weren't Catholics. It was just any kind of talisman or token that could keep them alive and safe. They were like, it just became like they reverted into this world of like folk magic when life was so dangerous.
Yeah. And all the significances of painting pinup girls on airplanes, and, you know, having call signs and all of that kind of stuff. You know, there's a tremendous amount of charge that goes into it. And then just the amount of brotherhood and connection that you feel with people that you serve with. The next closest thing I could equate that to would be the same kind of thing within a magic circle with, you know, with magical partners and stuff. There's no other place in the world where you find that same kind of camaraderie that people in the military do. People maybe say in law enforcement sometimes with stuff like that, but, you know, people who've served, you can attest to it. There's no connection that you find with a group of people anywhere else besides, you know, in the unit that you served in.
Yeah, I worked with a guy who he's dead now, died just a few years ago. He's an American from Indiana, actually, but he came across here too. I think he maybe was stationed with the US military after Vietnam, I think maybe in Germany. And he ended up in England and married an English woman. And so I worked with him for several years. And great guy. And the things that he told me, just reflecting what you said, Jason, about his experiences in the military in general, but particularly in Vietnam, were just something else. And it's clear that it was a defining, for better or worse, the defining phase of his life. No question about it.
Greg, growing up in Northern Ireland, you probably heard this story. Did you ever hear about that when the British Army in Belfast in the early 70s and the IRA were doing Crowley rituals on each other? There's actually even a book written about it. Have you heard about that?
I have not. Now, that is extremely interesting, and you should send me details such that you have about that. But no, I've not heard anything about that. It doesn't surprise me in a way, but no, that's news.
Yeah, one of the troubles were really bad in Belfast in the early 70s. The British Army were finding like pentagrams and candles, and where IRA snipers had been shooting at them, and they started doing it back themselves. And there's a whole theory that it was probably a big intelligence operation to try and freak each other out. But there's also a theory that they were actually using it on each other, that there was actually people on both sides who were actually messing with this stuff. And so there's a whole book written about it by a mainstream journalist I forget what it's called, but it came out when the papers were declassified that like basically the IRA and the British Army were running like Crowley rituals on each other.
That would be a difficult one to unpick, couldn't it? Like along the lines of what you just said. To what extent was it genuine, and to what extent was it just like a psyop? Just trying to freak people out, like carving pentagrams on their front door or whatever. Even though you don't believe in any of it whatsoever. So.
But apparently they were a very elaborate setups they found, like if very plausible ritual spots. And again, no one knows for sure if it was a psyop or maybe it started out as a psyop and became real. But it's just a remarkable story. It came about 5 years ago. Let me see it.
Well, that's another interesting wrinkle in all that, isn't there? Whether something's quote unquote genuine or not. If someone has a belief or a perception about something that's happening, that affects their reality, whatever the intention behind it is. And that's a cornerstone of our conversation about magic as well. Are you intending to do this? Because as I said earlier on, be careful about what we wish for. That's one of the things I learned actually very, very strongly. I'm kind of like massively sliding back to what I said at the top of the hour about the first time I ever attempted to manipulate reality along these lines is like you set an intention, you put energy and will, desire, intent into it, does not mean that reality will unfold in the way that you intend or expect. And that's where the phrase, be careful what you wish for, comes from, because you may get what you desire, but you may get other things as well.
That's why the adage of man know thyself is so important in magic, because you need to know yourself to know what you want. And
yes, that's one of the clarifying things that comes with any kind of magical practice, isn't it? Is self-knowledge, because Tina, as you say, whether you intend to or not, you're kind of forced to know yourself more as you go through the process. I think that happens.
Also by the result, I would say, if it unfolds for you in a way that is literally what you wished for, but maybe not what you intended for, you get to know yourself in a rather unpleasant way.
Yeah, it's almost like with that, Tina, it has a way of like people, like Thomas, you've said before in the your magic series from, I think it was 2016, like to go through and like kind of do an inventory of things. And, if you owe money to anybody, just take care of it, just kind of going through it and doing all that stuff. So it's like you handle your own bullshit, so your bullshit doesn't handle you in the magic circle. It's like the problem with a lot of these witchy poo types and the people like that is they go and they start hexing people and doing these workings, but it's like they've got so much of their own psychic baggage that they're bringing along that stuff is what ends up, because that's kind of in the forefront of their unconscious. It's like whatever's there that they're manifesting is they're manifesting that stuff at the surface level of their unconscious, their stuff that they're not even aware of, and that starts coming up and dealing with them. And that's why I think a lot of them end up having these like quickly developing cancers, and they start looking like toads, and they start putting on tremendous amounts of unhealthy weight, because it's just like all that stuff that wasn't
like they're falling off their skulls.
Yeah,
they're like the whole kinetic charge is gone. Greg, the book is called Black Magic and Bogeymen. Black Magic and Bogeymen, Fear, Rumor and Popular Belief in Northern Ireland, 1972 to 74, by Richard Jenkins. He might be a good guest for your show. It only came out like about 5 years ago.
Fantastic. I mean, that's the very definition of a niche book, isn't it, really? While we're talking about books, if there's a gap in the conversation, I hope Thomas isn't embarrassed. Sorcery, the invocation of strangeness. Thomas has referred to this a couple of times. This is widely available on the usual outlets. So there you go.
Well, thank you,
It's
Mr.
rather fabulous.
Thank you, Jane.
I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but I found this earlier on when I was looking through some papers in here. That is a 4-leaf clover. So I thought maybe that's brought us some good luck for this evening.
When I was a teenager, I sent my little brother and sister out to find 4-leaf clovers in the garden, and I said I'd give them £1 for every one they found. Just give them something to do for a bit of fun. Well, guess what? They came out like a ton of them. They're actually not that rare.
Brilliant.
Can you help me out with this? We're talking about, we've referred to magical battles, magical wars. There's something I'm struggling to remember here. I just don't have access to the internet right here. But with Dion Fortune and something to do with the Second World War and her intervention, attempted intervention on behalf of the British forces against the Nazis. Does any of that ring a bell?
Yeah,
I read that book.
I have this book somewhere. It's the Magical Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, they were. It was a very interesting story. And Lewis Spence, who wrote the very famous Occult Encyclopedia, it's a fantastic book. You have to get it if you don't have it. Lewis Spence wrote a book called The Magical History of the Third Reich I've referred to it in my own book, Valpurgis Night. On the eve of World War II, he had written a book warning that this is not the same Germany that we fought in World War I. It comes out of occult groups like the Armament Society, the Tula Society, and all these stuff. And you better prepare for this because this is not going to be like the Germans we fought in the last war. And of course, he was right. Now, the book was laughed and mocked at the time, but Lewis Spence, we all know he was right. He knew what he was talking about. Dion Fortune and Gardner was there, the daddy of Wicca. They used to visualize very fascinating rituals. And the book, the Magical Battle of Britain, is not really it's not a readable book. It's the notes from their operations printed. But a lot of the things they used to do was that they used to visualize when German bombers were coming in, that King Arthur, a kind of a force field would appear on the White Cliffs of Dover of a gigantic King Arthur, an Arthurian kind of like egregore. And it would appear over the White Cliffs of Dover to stop the German bombers from getting through. There was things like that. Other times they tried to bind, but there was one night in particular, and it's not in this book, it's in Gardner's book. And they went to the White Cliffs of Dover in 1941, I think it was. There was 4 of them, Dion Fortune, Gerald Gardner, and 2 others. And they launched a psychic attack directly on Adolf Hitler from the cliffs. In a couple of weeks, they were all dead except for Fortune and Gardner. It killed them. The ritual was so intense, it killed them. But that stuff is all true. There really was there was a magic, and one of them, I think, Austin Osman Spare, he is so unbelievable history. Adolf Hitler got a portrait of him. Adolf Hitler commissioned or bought a portrait before the war that Austin Osman Spare had painted. And when someone caught up with Osman, a journalist said something, is it true that Hitler has one of your paintings of him in his bunker or whatever? A bomb landed on Austin Osman Spare's house, that apartment that night, and destroyed all his artworks and ended him in hospital for weeks. So the World War II, this is what people don't know, that the thought deck with Lady Farida Harris and Crowley, that was created as the bombs were falling on London in the Blitz. And she would be traveling across London, dodging bombs, to actually show her the latest drafts of that. If that's not a charge, I don't know what is. But I can only imagine what the psychic charge was like in that city during those times. It must have been absolutely incredible. If you're anyway occult-minded, I mean.
Do you not think maybe some of the spaces that were created during that, when they were doing all these rituals together and stuff, this, like what was it, the mound where they all used to meet in the middle of the mound, all those kind of spaces are still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Iona, the island of Iona, was another place they did these rituals from. And Dion Fortune is a very interesting person. In her book on psychic attacks, she talks about that really dark stuff. And I can only imagine back in the day when this book came out, how shocking it was for people, how soldiers would try to stay alive in World War One by having sex with a soldier just at the moment he was dying, a comrade as he was dying. And he would sodomize him as he was dying, in the hope that he could actually steal his soul and stay alive himself or develop immortality. And it's the kind of shit that goes on in wars, that we never hear about, because when humans are pushed to these levels, they will do anything. But she actually was helping soldiers who did this. She called it the worst kind of depravity, to try and help them. They should take them to Iona and try and heal them of this post-traumatic stress from doing these acts. But she was a remarkable person. I went to visit her grave recently in Glastonbury. She was a remarkable woman, and you don't hear enough of. Apparently, her legacy has been kind of stolen by New Agers and Wiccans, but she really deserves to be up there with Crowley in terms of her influence on how we are, where we are now. She doesn't get enough credit.
I agree.
Yeah.
This whole discussion here really makes me wonder, as we're going into kind of the next era with war and everything, if there will be more of a magical influence on one of the sides that's going to develop over the next couple of decades, or is in development now, closer to like what you were talking about, Thomas, with the Germans of World War II being different than the Germans of World War One. If especially too, since it seems like the U.S. military in particular, and probably the CIA, and all the stuff over there on the other guy's side of the pond too, doing research into psychic spying with remote viewing and all of that, kind of seemed like it had its climax at, like, I want to say the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and then just rolled off as computers kind of took over. And it's like ever since like the 70s up through present time, it seems like those programs, to the public knowledge, have faded away, because they think, we don't need remote viewing because everybody's hooked up to the internet, and every cell phone, every all the cyber stuff, cyber intelligence stuff. We can do everything with computers. We can fly drones. We can do all that. And I'm just wondering, as that kind of has come to its completion, where it's not as effective, all the cyber stuff, if there's going to be a turn back to more magical warfare, where there will be, if there isn't currently already people working on things like creating egregores, like you mentioned, Thomas, of the Arthurian one over the cliffs of Dover, I think is what you said, things like that, and psychic spying again, and the ability to do psychic attacks, social engineering through psychic attack rather than through like propaganda through Netflix and social media influencers and stuff like that. If there is already tactical sorcery in development, or will be being developed, or has been developed and is already being used, it makes me wonder about that going forward into the next the next war, because there's this kind of romanticized idea that World War II was the end of all wars, and there's never going to be a war again after that. And it's like, I think there are still generations alive, at least here in the U.S., that kind of, as Thomas, you've said, have kind of considered time to have ended, history to have ended, I should say. But it's like, no, there's always going to be war and warfare, and we haven't seen a really, 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 really bad one. At least
Alexander Dugin, if you want to get an occult angle on Russia today, and particularly with Putin.
I've heard it. Yeah, there's a number of people that have mentioned him recently. Timothy was just mentioning him as well. Yeah, so I really think that's going to be a thing again, and there's like this overconfidence in cyber intelligence and in that computers have been the great savior of everything. And it's like, just quite simply, all it would take is, one really bad geomagnetic storm to knock out portions of networks, and the computer stuff would be non-usable. So anyway, that whole idea that there's been too much of a reliance on the cyber side of things, and if there's going to be a move back to a more magical side of things within warfare, and like you guys were mentioning.
But I wonder if it's going on with current events, because the communists banned all the magic and all the occult and paganism and everything, and since the Iron Curtain came down and the communists left, there's been a colossal revival in paganism and the occult in the Slavic world. So it may already be happening over there right now with things as they are. We just don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'd venture to say, is that it is going on, and perhaps I'm leading to the idea that maybe another side of it needs to develop it too, or a defense. Just like when they were developing the nuclear bomb, there also needed to be just as much effort put into developing defense against nuclear bombs. So if there's development of psychic magical whatever warfare, also having defense against psychic warfare, magical warfare. So.
Sorry, Tina, go ahead.
Oh, well, I know something that happened in Romania a while back, a couple of years back, is that the Romanian government wanted to impose a law to make folk witchcraft illegal, as in that you cannot ask money for magical services. And in the end, they didn't go through with it because the politicians were actually afraid that they would get cursed.
Because of all the gypsies there.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah. When the English witchcraft laws were abolished in the 1950 or whatever it was, and then you had the explosion, and you had two waves of the occult. You had the initial sort of hardcore occult of Crowley and all the unfortunate and all these people, and the Wiccas, the Gardner, and that kind of thing. And then you have the popular occult revival in the 1960s and 70s. Where you had like Richard and Linda Farah here in Ireland promoting witchcraft, and they were big stars at one time. Some very good old archival video of them on YouTube. You had other people like that. This is happening in the Slavic world now. So essentially, their witchcraft laws were abolished with the collapse of communism in 1990. They initially had their serious kind of hardcore stuff, but right now they're going through what we went through in the West in the 60s and 70s. They're popular occult revival. So who knows what's going on there right now? We just don't know, But that's what Tina was saying about Romania. That was gypsies. There's so many gypsies there, and they were terrified of them. And I think it was Vice or Wired or one of those magazines did a very good thing about that. And they were interviewing these gypsy women. They were really interesting to listen to. And they were saying, oh, yeah, the government's afraid of us. And so they should be.
And rightly so, yeah.
Well, there are still witchcraft laws in Italy.
Still?
There are. Well, not that you will be persecuted, but witch doctoring specifically. So if I would ever ask money for, let's say, a rune reading, and somebody comes to me, I have a physical ailment, and I would do a rune reading for them, I could technically be prosecuted for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Witchcraft has never been illegal in Ireland. We've never had any witchcraft laws here. So we've avoided that. I think that has a lot to do with different Catholics and Protestants. Catholics tend to be a little more relaxed compared to the Protestant countries. Scotland has a horrific, because it's a Protestant country, has a horrific history of persecution of occultists and witches.
It's funny because there's a lot of historic things about that coming out at the moment, and monuments being set in places and pardons being given.
Yep. Oh, it's awful. If you look at somebody reading some of the books of the witch trials and the witch home, I mean, Scotland was as bad as Germany. It was just awful. It was just odd. Scotland, Sweden, and Germany were the worst. And they were all Protestant countries. So it seems to be that if you're a witch or an occultist, you were okay in a Catholic country, or in grave danger in a Protestant country.
I think Tina needs to move to Ireland.
Yeah.
Protection.
The weather's so nice here.
Well, there is that.
No, it's very, but that's a minor thing in Italy. I mean, you could actually, in England, you could go to prison until 90, and they were locking people up for just doing things like tarot card reasons until 1950. Yeah, they were strict about it. It wasn't, they were actually enforcing it in some places.
Wow.
Well, that's how Richard and Linda Farrar moved to Ireland, because it was the only way they could actually promote witchcraft without actually having been locked up, because there was no witchcraft laws in Ireland, so they were actually safe here. But that's, even though they're both English, that's why they ended up here.
Well, as we approach the 2-hour mark here, I wanted to.
No way.
Yeah, we're about 20 minutes away from the 2-hour mark, but
Wow.
I wanted to put draw the attention back over to the live chat. If there's anybody tuning in live on Facebook right now, if there were any particular questions you wanted to ask a specific person here, or any general questions like Samantha asked earlier, go ahead and fire them away over there in the chat section while we start to round the evening off.
It's been an absolute pleasure to spend the evening with you guys. So thank you.
I'm glad we did this. It was nice and relaxed and terribly interesting too. We've all got new research material to go look up.
I'm fascinated by that thing you mentioned, Thomas. The whole thing about the IRA and the military in Northern Ireland. So I'm definitely going to check that out, because that's just, you talk about spiritual battles. I mean, all I can think of now, you told me about what basically happened. It's like, oh my God, can you imagine making a movie out of that? That'd be so original.
Yeah. Clive Barker or someone like that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Samantha is asking again. She says, I've heard that only Native Americans are allowed to use white sage. I think, Thomas, you have said, where to go? Thomas, you have said oh man, hold on. Okay. I think, Thomas, you have said that Europeans should not be using ayahuasca, but stick to mushrooms. Thoughts?
Well, no, it's not that hard and fast, but you will get the best answers from your own native things, the land you reside in. That's just a fact. And without sounding, it's a very sensitive thing for me to bring up, because all of a sudden people will go, how dare you? But I would never in a million years encroach upon a Navajo ritual. And right now there is the Beltane festival going on in Ushnak, and they have Afro-Caribbean witches and all kind, and it's not their tradition. And I don't like this idea of this new age thing of a spiritual capatheria. I think that each other respects each other and leaves their rituals alone. And there's very sinister people involved in mixing this stuff. Ayahuasca, I know people who are even whiter Irish than me who've done it and got stuff out of it. I just, and the mushrooms were fine with me, locally stuff. I'm a great believer in that we are tribes. I know it's not a politically correct thing to say anymore, but it's a fact. Doesn't mean we can't learn from each other. We can't share with each other. But the hippies have done a terrible disservice on us in many ways by thinking that you can just do anything you want. And you can do peyote, and you can, and all this stuff and everything. But this is what always bothered me about Crowley. Here he was doing peyote in Mexico when he was surrounded by mushrooms in England. I often found it kind of strange, but that's just how I might be wrong. But I tend to say, go with your local thing. Go with your tribal thing. And it doesn't mean it makes you better than anyone or anything like that. I just think something very in my heart just tells me that's what you should do.
What's everyone doing to celebrate tomorrow?
What are we doing tomorrow? Are we celebrating tomorrow?
What's everybody doing to celebrate tomorrow?
Well, I'm doing absolutely nothing. I'm just going to chill and be contemplative and just relax. I have nothing like that, anything spectacular or anything. What I do like to go in the morning and taste the morning dew, because that's very, that's very Beltane anyway. But apart from that, I'm very chilled though. We have it'll be like Christmas Day in a lot of ways. That kind of chilled, relaxed, thinking of the ancestors, thinking of the past, thinking of the future, and it kind of like a lot like what we've been discussing here tonight. The thoughts that don't concern myself with other worlds and not this world.
Oh, I'm going to concern myself with this world tomorrow, as me and the rest of the farmers are going to the field to get shit-faced during a barbecue.
Brilliant.
Good for you.
We have one more question we have another question over in the comments from Shane. Shane asks, could the use of flags, symbols, etc. by certain people in social media profiles be viewed as self-hexing? From Shane.
100%. Yes. In fact, flags are magical by nature. That's why they exist. And most of them have been developed by places like the Grand Orient Lodge in Paris with actual occultic meanings. And yes, yeah, absolutely. You should never have, in fact, if you're to put any kind of symbol up on your social media, it should be a sigil you create yourself that represents you, your own, like a monogram or something like that. You've all seen mine. It kind of looks like a dollar sign, that kind of one. You do that yourself, you'll be okay. And yeah, you see, if you put up a flag of a country that's at war, you're attaching yourself to the suffering and pain of that. And especially if you're doing it for virtue signaling, you're capitalizing upon the suffering of people who are going through real things. You are profane. You're involved in wickedness. Even though you think you're not, you are.
Yeah, flags are symbols. Symbols are magical. And I'd be very interested to hear or to read, if anyone's done this or they haven't done it, they should do it, a breakdown of like world flags and energy and symbolism. For example, why does the Union Jack, the flag of the UK, and the Stars and Stripes of the US, why do they seem to carry more power than other national flags? You know, lots of them are tricolours. You know, they're just like, you know, three bands of color. So yeah, avenue of exploration, I would say.
Very good, yeah. If you want to see where the US flag came from, go look at the flag of the East India Company. That's the US flag. It was a commercial operation, and they took the same flag. The Union Jack, we know, but the Union Jack's interesting because it doesn't have Wales on it. And that's a weird one, isn't it? It has England, Ireland, and Scotland, but it doesn't have Wales. So that's an interesting one for investigating.
Dragon.
Yeah, it has the Union, the Union of England, Scotland, and Wales, and Ireland, but it doesn't have the Welsh flag, which I find very peculiar. Very peculiar. Yet the Royal Standard has the Welsh thing on it, but not the Union Jack. So it's a weird one.
That is really strange.
You know, it's one of those things you never think about until someone mentioned it. Someone mentioned to me a few weeks ago, Where's the Welsh on the Union flag? They're not there. And so what does that really mean? What are we talking about here? You know, it's like, isn't it odd? So we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, that sounds about good. Does anybody else have anything further they would like to add? Bits of wisdom from Jade, Tina, Greg, Thomas, Timony.
I have a question, actually, for the Beyond Room 313 people. Speaking about sigils, I have noticed some overlay on the Week in Strange. Am I imagining that?
Oh, that's Jason.
I noticed that too.
Jason, that weird sigil thing you have when you show pictures. That's Jason's gig. Yeah, there you go.
Like Thomas said, you use a personalized sigil if you're going to use anything, not something of something else. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, especially something that's not connected to a war that's going on and it's not your own country, because you're actually capitalizing on the suffering of the people there.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're involved in black magic. So all these virtue signalers and Twitters who have all their Ukraine flags right now are basically not doing anything that's going to help them. In fact, it might damage them. And that's the price you pay for vanity. What did that movie, The Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino, and he goes, vanity, my favorite sin. And there you go. Gets them every time. So thanks, everybody, for coming along. Thank you, Jason, Timothy, Greg, Tina, Jade, and all you listening on board. I'm very glad we did this. It was a spur of the moment idea, and everybody showed up and did a wonderful job. Only left to say is like Shona Beltane, and look after yourselves. And we can strange on Monday. See us then, guys. Good night, and thank you, everybody.